everybody, I'm Roxy and this is Write Me BS. So today I bring you my second summer highlights video, which I'm very well aware that for most of you might be a winter highlights video. So the past video I'm going to link down below and in the eye up here, but it was a currently reading of sort. This one is honorable mentions and books that perhaps I didn't like so much. And then the next video is going to be 5-star book. First, a 2-star book, which was actually my lowest rating, and that's I Hear Your Voice by Young-ha Kim. This one is translated, of course, from Korean, and it's about two children that are friends and they live like in a greedy part of Seoul, and you get the feeling that it's going to be about them growing up and their friendship and how they end up in a biker gang. But it's about so much more than that, in a good way, but also in a way that feels like it lacks direction. I like how it talks about the violence in the streets, how kids would run away from their parents, and it gets very meta and it gets very odd very fast, and not in a good way. I love odd, I love graphic, I love gritty, but it's done in a way that feels gratuitous. Chris Lee is supposed to be a great translator, and I don't feel like it's the translation. I think it was structurally an issue of construction and narration, and it was too bad because it had the potential to be so good. The second one is Bright Young Things by I don't remember who, I'm sorry. But this book is like a guide to the Roaring 20s. I thought when I got it online that it was going to be social history books of sorts, but no, it's an actual like manual. It actually teaches you how to throw 20s inspired parties and how to dress and how to do some cocktails. But it also teaches you some names and some history and some fashion. It was interesting enough. I gave it a 3-star rating, which is not bad, but it was like a fluff book that I read in like a day. It was not the substantial piece of social history I expected, but that's not the fault of the book. That was my fault because I didn't research properly. Then I have The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night by Jen Campbell. This was one of my most anticipated releases of the year. Last year, of course, my only anticipated release, because I don't really wait for releases. I mean, I find out when they are coming out thanks to BookTube, but I'm not one of those people who like log onto the site and look at the catalog. This was like the only book I was expecting, and this is a short story collection heavily inspired by both fairy tales and Alice Smith. So I know Jen Campbell loves Alice Smith. I do too, thanks to Jen Campbell. This was good, but not as good as I expected, quite honestly. There were lots of really good stories, but there were other ones that really felt incomplete or felt a little bit too reminiscent of Alice Smith. And I know, like, Alice Smith herself borrows from lots of other people, and right now I'm reading a line made by The Walking that in some ways reminds me of Alice Smith, and in others reminds me of like Maggie Nelson, but not in the same way. There is one story in particular that felt so similar to me, it really bothered me. Other than that, I would recommend this. I think some stories were so gripping. The first one, Animals, actually, I think it was one of my favorites. It's just so good, and it's exactly the kind of gritty and dark thing that I love. Then I read The White Book by Han Kang, which is one of the most terrible books that I ever read, in the sense that it wrecked me inside. This is an exploration of the color white, but regarding the death of Han Kang's, let's say, young sister, although it's a baby that her mother had, which died almost immediately after having been born. And she talks about how if her sister hadn't died, she probably wouldn't have been born. And also how it affected her to be the daughter of someone in mourning. It's very interesting. I love the first and third parts. They were heartbreaking. I cried. However, the second part, although I see what it was trying to do, it's told from a perspective that I don't think adds anything to the narrative, and sadly it actually took from it, because I just don't think it was the right choice structurally, but I still recommend it because it's an awful but great book. I also read Bluets by Maggie Nelson, and actually I was recommended like both books while on my Mr. Beast Reading Delights reading spa, which was fun. It's a meditation on the color blue in a much more deliberate way that Hank Hank's book is the White Book, because it does involve loss. It's about Maggie Nelson trying to get over someone, but it's much more like a collection of anecdotes, and they are actually numbered. I think it's great. I really enjoyed it. The meditations to me were so interesting. A lot of people didn't like it. They thought it was a bit too all over the place, but I think the connective thread is there, and I would recommend it. Then I read Days Without End by Sebastian Barry, and I really love this. So this is a historical fiction book that actually won, I think, the Costa last year or a couple of years prior, but it's basically about two gay cowboys that are fighting in the Civil War, or are preparing to fight in the Civil War, one of those two. They come across a young girl and they sort of adopt her and form this little family. It's an interesting book. It's not a perfect book, but I love the meditations on sexuality, coming of age, acceptance, and transness. It does have a trans element. What I liked the most about this book, though, was the consistency of the voice of the narrator. It's narrated first person, and it's not like what the author usually does, and he himself talked about how he hadn't done anything like this before, and it's so well pulled off that my hat's off. A lot of people questioned the amount of detail given. They thought the narrative was kind of distanced from the actual characters. I didn't feel that. I felt like it worked well with what the author wanted to accomplish, even if perhaps you don't like westerns, because I don't like westerns very much, but I enjoyed this one. It's just that the level of craftsmanship, I think, was really good. And then I read a poetry collection called On Balance, which I really liked. I gave it a 4 out of 5. However, it was not what I expected, because it's supposed to be about ecological balance, and it's supposed to be very much about historical points in humanity where balance was broken or maintained, but it's not. It's really not. It's more about the historical aspect. It's more about lots of other things that I think it's interesting, but it's not what I was promised. And although there are some poems that deal with ecology, most of them don't. I like collections that feel like they have a central thread. Otherwise, it's just an anthology. Like the 4 stars was because the poems themselves were so good, and I would have to rethink it. But yeah, I wouldn't especially recommend it unless you are one of those people who dip in and out, because then you would just appreciate the poems for what they are. So yeah, it's still like the poems are really good. So that's what I have to say about it. Then I have David Bowie, The Last Interview, and so this is a collection of interviews. It's a whole series. I really enjoyed it because I love David Bowie. A lot of people didn't like it because they thought they were like randomly put together. I liked the selection. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good, interesting, comprehensive selection. I thought it was sad that the last interview, that was his actual last interview, was kind of not about him at all. But anyways, I still recommend it, especially if you like David Bowie. But if not, look up this series because they have like a whole catalog on different people, so maybe you will find someone you like. Then finally I have a great milestone for me, The Sense of an Ending by Julian Barnes. This is about a man who's remembering his youth, particularly his friendship with his school and college friends, and about his first girlfriend, Veronica, and how they were pretentious but in love, and how everything was odd and turbulent, but then he has to do a double take. And it's just a brilliant book. I will say though that some of the pacing is odd. That said, I still enjoyed it so much. It's a brilliant meditation on time and memory and the way it plays with your feelings. It tends to lag a bit in the middle, but the plot twist is good and the characters are good and just the whole concept is genius. I hope you enjoyed that. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe and comment. I'm sorry for the lighting. I'm going to try and edit it a little better because I realize that I'm losing so much light and it looks awfully dark, but I'm going to try and fix it because I think I know how. That's it. See you next time. Check out the first one down below.